What makes a soundtrack good? To a lot of people, the answer to that question might involve high-quality, uncompressed songs and sound effects or live orchestrated compositions, which aren't bad things, and they certainly fit some great movies and games, but I don't think those answers are necessarily correct, if there ever was a correct answer to that question. Think about it just for a second, and while you do, let me play you a song. In the context of this video, you might not think that this song fits too well, but in 2014's Lisa the Painful, it's a perfect match. The game, which I'll just be calling Lisa, is a turn-based RPG made by solo developer Dingling. It takes place in a post-apocalyptic world where there's only men, and the main quest follows the main character Brad trying to locate a girl who he found and raised but was eventually kidnapped. It's just as unforgiving as it sounds, with a tone that switches from very depressing to outright hilarious to not outright hilarious every few minutes. Just like its tone, Lisa's music is all over the place with some EDM tracks, some chill indie sounding tracks, some 80s synthwave, and everything in between. You can't really pinpoint 1, 2, or even 3 genres for the overall collection of songs, which is relatively common for a video game soundtrack. I mean, you want a song to fit the area that the player's in, but this one seriously goes everywhere and bounces between genres every few minutes. It also has some really unique sound effects and fanfare that helped it solidify itself as a really quirky cult classic, which is surprising because the game's sole developer says that he considers himself to be a very basic music artist. In the same interview, he goes on to say that every song has its own inspiration. I took from other games, rap, music soundtracks. Anytime a song made me feel something and I thought it fit the Lisa world, I would draw huge inspiration from it. It didn't matter where it came from, but most of the really weird songs are just me screwing around. No direction. So how did a very basic music artist create a soundtrack that's so varied in genre with a length of over 2 hours and 45 minutes? The answer is actually pretty simple. The trial version of FL Studio 8, as in the 2008 version of the popular music program. For those of you who don't know, FL Studio is a digital audio workstation, which is pretty much just a fancy term for a program that makes music. It's popular among hobbyists because it's easy to get into, and it has a very generous trial version full of samples and instruments that you can use to make some quality tracks right away. So let's go back in time and download the 2008 version of FL Studio so we can see exactly what he used to make everything. Whew, that is some grade A nostalgia. So this is it, the program that the entire soundtrack was made on. The game used a lot of samples and loops found on the side here, along with a virtual synthesizer called Citrus. Some of the tracks also have some external samples and presets that can be found online, so we can find the preset used in the melody of this song, and we can download it and arrange it here. But if we want to save this arrangement, we run into a problem. See, in the trial version of FL Studio, you can't save. One of the main draws of wanting to buy the full version was so that you could save your songs and work on them later. So if you can't save, how was anybody able to put a song from here into something else, let alone an entire video game soundtrack? Well, there's surprisingly a few ways we can go about it. If we go over to the top left here, you'll notice that in the trial version, you can still export songs into an MP3 or WAV file. However, once you closed out of the program, the arrangement and how everything was set up would be lost. Thankfully, there was a workaround. See, you could turn your project into a MIDI file, which would save the arrangement, and then you could just load it in the next time you boot it up. This pretty much made it so anybody could make simple songs if they took the time to save everything individually. All they would have to do was take a few minutes to load everything back up, and there was their arrangement. So this is how I would have done it, but I just wanted to note that this is speculation, and Austin hasn't really gone into too much detail on how he saved the tracks from the trial version, but he has said that he did eventually buy the full version of the program for the expansion Lisa the Joyful, so thankfully he wouldn't have to go through all of this now. If you've played Lisa, one thing that you'll likely remember is how much the game surprises you. It's littered with hidden areas, random events, and entire sections that are risky from a design standpoint, but work out so well because of how cleverly they're implemented. One example of this is the Russian roulette section of the game, where you're forced to use some of your party members to win up to 3 rounds of Russian roulette. If they die during this part, there's no way to revive them, and if you run out of party members, you get a game over. It works out well because the game has 30 recruitable companions, so it's almost like it's forcing you to switch things up if you haven't done so already. It also begins abruptly with no warning, so if you've never played Lisa before, you won't have the time to prepare for it. The same thing could be said about how you're introduced to new songs in the game. In a lot of 2D RPGs, when you transition to a new area, the music will quickly fade out and a new track will fade in as the new area begins to appear. But in Lisa, when you go through a door or get to the side of the screen, you don't fade into the new area, it just appears right away. This is used as a device to create tension in the game, because you can immediately go from a song like this to a drastically different song like this. The game also puts some surprising things immediately on the next screen, like a band of bandits, or a creepy mutant. This tactic is used all the time in Lisa, and the sound design makes for some genuinely surprising moments. Oh, that brings me back to my question. What makes a soundtrack good? I thought about this for a while making this video, and I examined a lot of soundtracks from movies and games that I thought were amazing. Some had live orchestras, some featured a mix of MIDI and live instruments, and some were made in the trial version of a popular music program. But one thing stood out in all of them. They always surprised me. Mediocre video game soundtracks tend to restrict themselves, which isn't always bad if the tone of your game is constant, but that's almost never the case for games. It all boils down to fitting the tone of the game, and sometimes that means hitting the player with the song they didn't expect. So that might not be the most insightful conclusion, but I love talking soundtracks, so if you have any other ideas, make sure to let me know in the comments below. Also, Lisa is a really unique game, but it deals with some very sensitive topics like abuse and suicide, so if you were thinking about giving it a go after watching this video, keep that in mind. Anyways, thanks for watching.